Welcome to Documentary First, an inside look at a first-time filmmaker's journey. I'm not your host, Josh Lindsay, but I am the first-time filmmaker, Christian Taylor. Once again, this week we are doing things a little bit differently. I have been out again for a whole nother week and haven't been able to get together with the Documentary First podcast team, so I'm going to update you about what's been going on over the last week or so, and then we're going to let you listen to episode 2 of Documentary First. If you're a new listener, you might want to go back and listen to episode 1, and then if you're an old listener, it might be fun to kind of go back into the archives and look at where we were then and hear where we are now. So just to give you a little bit of an update, I have just recently returned from a week-long vacation. I went to Mississippi to be with my family, and also I did 2 focus group screenings while I was there. I showed the film to family and friends and supporters in Laurel, Mississippi, which is my hometown. And then on Monday, this past Monday, I showed the film to Easy Company veteran and cast member Brad Freeman, along with his friends and family. And it was an incredibly interesting experience. 2 stories that really meant a lot to me over these 2 screenings. In the first screening, I met with Jimmy Bass. Jimmy Bass is a World War II veteran who fought in the Pacific. He then came home and has been living in my hometown of Laurel, Mississippi. He founded a veterans museum there and was incredibly touched by what we were doing and was really blessed by hearing the gratitude of the French people for their freedom. I also met another woman there. Her name is Margie Hohenstein, and she came up to me after the screening with tears in her eyes and said, "I am a changed person. I had no idea this is the way the French people felt. I thought they hated Americans, and I have never had any warm feelings toward the French people, but this film has changed everything about the way I perceive the French." And that really blessed me because that is my hope, that people will walk away from this film changed. The other thing that was so incredibly powerful to me was in this small screening that I did with Mr. Brad Freeman. We were in a home and we were showing it just on a large screen smart TV. Brad Freeman was there. He was a mortarman with Easy Company. He was under Don Malarkey and who was also under Dick Winters. And he was there as they were helping to take on the German battery at Brecourt Manor. If you're familiar with Band of Brothers, you know what I'm talking about. If you're not familiar with Band of Brothers, you should go and watch it. Episode 1 and 2 will give you a great idea about some of the things that happened in Normandy. So I'm sitting there with Brad Freeman, my 17-year-old son, Josh, and 2 other veterans and their wives. And I kind of rushed in there and began to show the screening and wasn't really thinking about the fact that I was actually with someone that had been there in 1944. I also had leaned over to my son Josh and said, I know you've seen this before and you know all of these things. You're welcome to sleep if you want. You don't have to feel like you have to watch the whole thing again. And he said, no, I'm going to watch it. So I tell you that to set you up for the 2 things that happened that I'm about to tell you about. I'm sitting there and there's this part that comes on, and it is archival video speaking with Michel de Vallivier, who was the owner of Brecourt Manor. And as I hear him talk about Easy Company coming to his farm to liberate it and what they did, it hit me like a ton of bricks that I was sitting there with one of the men that had actually been there. And I was overcome with emotion, thinking that, wow, this man knows exactly what Michel de Vallivier is talking about. I wonder what he's going to say at the end. And as I watched the film, I watched Brad Freeman watch the film. And he cried and he laughed. And at the end, when I asked him, what did you think? And he said, well, it brought back a lot of memories. It was a very good film. And that meant so much to me. And I felt like that we had done a good job telling that story. And then I looked over at my son, and he is crying and very emotional. And I said, Josh, what did you think about the film? And he got very quiet, and he said, I think I'm a jerk. And we were all stunned because we certainly weren't expecting that response. And I was like, what are you talking about? He said, you've been working on this project for 2 years, and I haven't cared. I haven't talked to any veterans. And he said, you sit in history class and you hear things, but they don't really make any difference. But then you meet somebody, and it changes everything. and I'm sorry. And one of the other veterans in the room said, well, there's no time like the present to turn things around. And I said, yeah, Josh, you're sitting here with 4 veterans in the room. And so he did. He began to ask each one of them about their experiences and their stories. And Brad Freeman began to tell him about what his experience in World War II was like, and to talk to Josh about the importance of caring about history. And then when he asked another man, his name was Charlie, about his service and his experience, Charlie said, I served from 1961 to 1966. And I really wanted to go to Vietnam, but they wouldn't send me because I was an instructor and he was a Marine. I was an instructor, a Marine instructor, and I sent guys to Vietnam. But he said, I was in combat in the Dominican Republic in 1965. Had you ever heard about that conflict? Of course, I said no. And he said, well, let me tell you what happened. And he told me about being dropped off on a beach with, many, many other Marines and 82nd Airborne without any ammunition. They got on the beach and they were just being shot at all around. All they could do were dig holes and hide. When they were brought ammunition, it was the wrong kind for their guns. Finally, they got the right ammunition, and at that point, they had lost 80% of all the men on the beach. But in 20 minutes, the conflict was over because they finally had their ammunition. And he said, you know what? You can look that up on Wikipedia, but all the information is wrong. I was there. I know what happened, and that information isn't right. And then he said, through, a cracked voice and tear-stained eyes, nobody's ever asked me my story before, and I've never told that. And to me, I'll never forget that moment. It made me understand even more deeply how important this project is because it gets people talking about their stories. So I just wanted to share those little things with you as, we go into this next week, and ask you to truly think about supporting our film, listening to the other podcasts to hear what we've been doing, following us on social media, checking out our website. And, I also want to invite you to come to the Chicago screening. It's July 24th. We will be posting things on our social media about how to get tickets. So, if you're interested, check out our social media. We'd love to have you join us. It's at the Lake Theater in Oak Park, and it's from 7 to 10. There will be some cast members there and crew members there. There's about a 500-seat theater, so it's going to be a really special evening. C.O. Bauer, one of our veterans from the 95th Infantry Division, is going to be there. Also, please send us an email or give us a note on Facebook to let us know you're listening. We would love to get to know you a little better. If you want to share any of your stories with us, we'd love to hear them. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the second episode of Documentary First.
Hey everybody, welcome to Documentary First, a behind-the-scenes look at the girl who wore freedom, an inside look at a first-time filmmaker's journey. I'm your host, Josh Lindsay, also from the Movie Proposal podcast. Today is with me our first filmmaker, Christian Taylor.
Hey everybody.
And again, as always, our trusty-dusty research extraordinaire, Jason Rugg.
Hey there.
So today is our second podcast where we're going to get a behind-the-scenes look at The Girl Who Wore Freedom, Christian Taylor's first documentary.
Let me tell you what that's all about real quick.
Please do so.
Yeah, so The Girl Who Wore Freedom is a feature-length documentary about the Normandy liberation, we call it, but from the perspective of the Normandy civilians. So it's a fresh perspective on this World War II time period, and it's really quite moving to hear people who had been occupied by the Germans, liberated by the Allies, talk about what their experiences were. So that's what our story is about, and it's been a very interesting ride for me, and I've learned a lot along the way. So I'm really hoping that through this podcast we can, educate, inspire, and encourage people to do this if they have a story to tell.
And in case people don't know already, where can they go to learn more about The Girl Who Wore Freedom and the behind the scenes.
Thank you for asking. www.normandystories.com. That's our film's website, and you can see a trailer there. You can also learn all about the cast and the crew. You can see the behind the scenes story, and we also have a blog every week where we have guest bloggers who write on everything from the 5 things you should pack to take to Normandy to why you should have a civics test before you graduate high school. So check out the blogs. We also have a Facebook page, The Girl Who Wore Freedom, Instagram, and Twitter. So you can engage with us on all those different platforms.
So I want to kick off with a little bit of trivia, but trivia from Christian Taylor and actually Jason and maybe myself. The Girl Who Wore Freedom is a documentary. Christian, what is your favorite documentary?
Oh, gosh. Oh, man. My favorite documentary. Well, I have to say I've really been into the Roosevelts, but that's just because it's recent. So it's been in my...
That's quite all right.
Yeah.
If that's what came to mind. Now, that's a Ken Burns one, right?
It is a Ken Burns one. I do love Ken Burns.
And where can you see that?
So it's on Netflix right now, and there's also my second favorite, or maybe tied. It's 5 Came Back. So 5 Came Back are the 5 directors. Why you're laughing? That was going to be yours. I'm sorry.
It's so good.
It is so good.
I don't know this one.
Oh my gosh, you don't?
No.
Well, you want to tell about it? Go ahead.
Yeah, so it's I talked about it on the movie proposal once.
I wasn't paying attention, but go ahead.
Me either. It's about 5 filmmakers who went off to World War II, volunteered to go be the film units, and they're most of the reason why we have the footage we have from World War II, and it absolutely phenomenal story.
And they're Hollywood directors. So Frank Capra, John Hughes, was it John Hughes or Frank Hughes?
Houston.
Yeah, John Huston. Oh, shoot. Now I'm forgetting their names.
I'm looking it up.
Howard something.
Do you know where we can watch the documentary?
Yes,
it's on Netflix.
Netflix.
It's on
Netflix.
And basically
Netflix.
what happens is the Army went to them and said, you need to come and tell these stories for us. They joined up and they took everything that they knew about making films into this military arena, and basically they made propaganda films that were for the armed forces, but also for the public in order to support them. And then you had some that were documenting exactly what was happening. So, for example, the Battle of Midway, if you've ever watched that film, it's shot. I mean, it's for real. It's the real stuff woven into that, story.
It was William Wyler, Frank Capra, George Stevens, John Ford, John Huston.
Yes.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, 5 Came Back.
Well,
Yours?
Yes, mine is, it's not World War II related, but it's definitely related to this film, My Date with Drew.
Oh, I've never even heard that.
Oh my gosh. Now, I've mentioned this one also on the movie proposal, but it is a young, aspiring filmmaker. He moves out to Hollywood, gets some dumb job just to pay the bills. He leaves the Midwest or whatever to come out to L.A. He can't, make it in Hollywood as a film director, but he gets this idea. He's about my age, so he's had a crush. He's a Gen Xer. He's had a crush on Drew Barrymore forever. And he gets inspired to try and get a date with her. And back then, you could buy a digital camera from, I think it was Circuit City, and they had a 30-day return policy. So they had no money, so what they did is they borrowed their friend's credit card, bought the camera, had 30 days to film this movie and get a date with Drew, and then they had to return the camera because they had no money, right? So, inspiration by desperation, I guess. And
Gosh, I wish I would have thought of that.
but it is one of the most entertaining, inspiring films.
Did he get the date with Drew?
I'm not going to tell you what happens.
Man,
You have to see
Where
it.
do you see this?
It's on Amazon Prime.
Amazon Prime. I also own the DVD. I love it that much. So, My Date with Drew, check it out.
Awesome. I will check it out. Thank you for sharing.
So speaking of inspiration, let's talk about that. So let's go back to the beginning. This all goes back to a young guy named Hunter who led you somewhere to inspire you.
Yeah.
So why don't you share that story?
So this is 2015, and I have 4 boys. I'm a stay-at-home mom, but I began working out of my home, doing voiceovers and some acting, print modeling, and industrial acting. That was kind of my focus at the time. But one day, Hunter, my son, my oldest son, who was in the 101st Airborne Division, called me and said, "Mom, the Army's sending me to France." And I was like, what? We're going to France? And
We're invading France.
He's like, no, Mom, you are not going. And I was like, oh, you just wait. Yes, I am. So I will never forget. I was sitting in my garage when that phone call came, and I knew there was nothing that could keep me from going to France. I thought at the time that he was going to actually be a reenactor. Like, I just didn't understand any part of this world at all. And I just thought that his group was going to go over and reenact what happened in 1944. And when I asked Hunter, well, what happened? What are you going to do? He said, I have no idea. I just do what they tell me to do. So when the time got closer, I said, well, where am I supposed to meet you? He said, Mom, I do not know. I'm just going to have to tell you when I get over there. So the day that I landed, I'd never driven anywhere like overseas. I had only been to Germany back in high school, and I knew no French whatsoever. And so I was petrified. I decided to take my second son, who had just graduated from high school, Jacob, and we went together, flew into Paris, took a train to Caen on the northwestern edge of France, which is technically Normandy. And then we rented a car and drove to Carentan. Hunter told us he was going to be there participating in a parachute drop. And I said, well, where is this taking place? He goes, I have no idea. You're going to have to find out when you get there. So I was able to figure out how to drive the car. The road signs were a complete conundrum. I have no idea how I got, I think I drove 2 hours or 2.5 hours from Caen to the Carentan. When we got there, I was looking around, and remember, I thought that they were supposed to be reenacting like real reenactors, and I saw this 1944 Willys Jeep with American-looking GIs in there, so I thought, oh my goodness, this is them. So I decided to follow them wherever they were going, and they broke down, and I said, Jake, go find out if we're headed the right direction. So he does. He comes back. He's like, Mom, they don't speak English. They're French. And I was like, where have I landed? Like, I had
France.
It was crazy. I was totally. They looked so American, and then we saw parachutes. That's how we found this place. We saw the parachutes falling from the sky, and we headed in the direction of where they were falling. And I see my son and his little unit with a giant screaming eagle flag walking through the middle of this crowd. I heard Glenn Miller playing on the loudspeakers in the mood. And it was just this surreal experience for a moment, because when I got to this street, I saw these, modern day American soldiers, and then all around them were people dressed as if it was 1944.
Wow.
And it was just... I was really speechless.
This is a big deal over in France. I don't think most Americans realize how the French celebrate what the Americans did on D-Day.
Exactly.
Right?
I mean, that's why I was so shocked. I had no idea that this is what they do every year to honor their liberation. I mean, and at that time, I think it was the 71st anniversary of D-Day. So... within 5 minutes of finding Hunter, we're hugging, exchanging, greetings, and a beautiful French woman comes up and asks Hunter if she can take his picture. And I was like, well, I'll take your picture together. I'm his mom. And so she got in the picture with Hunter, took a picture, and she was wearing this green army jacket. And she said, this jacket was given to my mother in 1944 by an American GI. And I said, what? Are you kidding me? Like, is your mom still alive? She's like, well, yeah, she's right here. And, here's my dad. And I couldn't believe it. That was the closest I had ever been to an eyewitness of history. And I right away began asking, questions. What do you remember? What can you tell me? And I was filming at the time and handed the film to my son, Jacob, because I thought this would be an incredible this would be an incredible moment to film. That was the birth of this film.
Would you have like your iPhone or something?
Yeah.
Okay, and so you got that recorded.
Yeah.
Is that going to be part of the film?
And I don't know. I hadn't thought about that. It actually has been on our Facebook page. We probably need to reshare that. But yeah, the very first moment, the very first question that I asked was on that film.
So the seed was basically planted in that moment.
Yeah.
you have the rest of the time with Hunter. How long were you there?
I was there for 3 or 4 days, and we said goodbye to that family after about 15 or 20 minutes. You know, that brush with history just kind of blew my mind. And on this, this like 2-week time period, the French will schedule each day. There's a series of celebrations depending on what happened on that day. So this was June 3rd or 4th, and it began with this, parachuting. And then from there, we walked to the next ceremony, which was at the Cabbage Patch, where a huge battle took place. And then from there, we walked to the town hall of Carentan for another ceremony. So Hunter was sort of like an honor guard with his guys participating in these ceremonies. By the third ceremony, I ended up standing next to this same family that I had just met earlier in the day. And from that moment on, they just adopted us. And they took us all around Normandy, to all the other ceremonies and just entertained us for the next 3 or 4 days. I never left this tiny little section, which is called the American sector, and it's where the 101st and the 82nd parachuted in, and where they landed on Utah Beach. So it's Sainte Marie du Mont, Carentan, Sainte Mary Glise, Angleville, right around in there. And during that time, I learned that the mother who was given the jacket had become very famous because her mother made a dress for her out of parachutes in the sort of that resembled the American flag. And so in 1945, Danny was chosen to be in the first commemoration ceremony.
So Danny was a little girl during...
Danny was 5 on D-Day.
Okay.
And she remembers soldiers. She remembers the parachutes flying in the night before. She remembers soldiers marching off of Utah Beach right in front of her front door, giving her candy and chocolate. First time she'd ever tasted those. So it's pretty powerful.
Wow. And then you went back home.
Yeah.
We're going to hear more of that story later, but then you started putting the pieces together to put the film together. Is that right?
Yeah. It took me about a year to figure out, could I do this? How do I do this? It was a lot of research and contemplation and trying to figure out.
This would be a great... I want to give a plug for international travel. I always think of my parents because when I was a kid, my mom taught classes for... I'm not going to say the right class, but it's like, women who are pregnant and they want to do exercising. Anyway, they went to the YMCA. My mom taught the class. And it was all these women whose husbands were doctors that had come over from Ireland. And so then my mom became friends with them. And then my dad became friends with the husbands. And then eventually fast forward a few years, my parents, I'm in high school. Several years later, my parents are now in Ireland visiting friends that they made, a few years ago. And so it's just great that I think that you stepped out and had this experience and met these people who we're going to hear more about this and how close you've become to them. And it's led to this awesome journey and this awesome project. So
yeah, it's been life-changing for me, but not only from me, for these original French family that I met and all of their friends. Nobody has ever told their story before. So for them, it has just been an incredible journey. To have given them this gift sometimes takes my breath away.
I'm sure it does.
Yeah. So, there's a lot more interesting things we can talk about next, but we should probably be wrapping up. We're going to try to keep these segments to around 15 minutes, so, little bite-sized chunks.
That sounds good. All right. Well, hey, everyone, thanks for listening to Documentary First, where we believe everyone has a story to tell, and you can be the one to tell it. So next time on Documentary First, we'll talk about what came next. We're going to learn all about a special woman named Flo. Thanks again for listening, everybody.
Bye, everybody.